I'm from Sandpoint, and originally, and as I left in 1958 to come to the University of Idaho, I got in the car as a waterfowl biologist. I changed my major by the time I got to Coeur d'Alene into something called extractive industries. I still don't know what that is. Then I was going into business administration. Then I took accounting 101 and I changed once again to history. And I stayed with history until I got out and went to the Air Force and then came back. In Indiana, I was married to Deanna at the time. Then we spent 3 years here at the University of Idaho. And I'll tell you one civil rights story from my undergraduate days at the University of Idaho. I was pledged and became a member of Delta Tau Delta, one of the fraternities up here. And it was a racist organization. But back in the day, nobody paid much attention to that. So we were, I and another fellow were back at the National Convention in 1960. It was called the Carnegie. And there was a bunch of fat old gentlemen who look a lot like me now that ran Delta Tau Delta, the national organization. And they made the mistake in one of our meetings to open it up to the public general comments. And all the comments were about race. Why are we a racist organization? And when are we going to open up to African Americans, et cetera, et cetera. And all these fat old gentlemen, all they could do was sit up there and sputter. And I thought to myself, these guys can be rolled. There's nothing to this Jim Crow business. So I came back to, in the fall, a friend of mine from Sandpoint, named Larry King, wanted to become a fraternity member at the University of Idaho. And I said, Larry, I says, the whole fraternity system at the University of Idaho is a racist organization. You're Chinese American. You're not going to get pledged by anybody. He said, well, I want to go through and have the experience. I said, well, I'll let you stay at the university. I'll let you stay at the Delta House. So I had him at the Delta House. And as it turned out, everybody in the Delta House really, really liked Larry. And we had these long conversations about pledging Larry, maybe the first non-Aryan to ever be a member of the Delta House. So we weighed the consequences of that. And the pledge card said your name, your address, and your race. And they'd already filled in white. That was the only response that we had. So how are we going to, you're not going to lie. So we decided that it's pretty clear what Larry Eng is. ENG is a pretty clear message that you're from China, your ancestors are from China. So we decided to have him put his name and his address, and the Delta Mu chapter, and he wanted to become a member. And then we just left the race part blank. And if they had challenged us, then we were going to separate ourselves from Delta Tau Delta. But they never challenged us, so it was a de facto desegregation on a very minor level. But that was 60 years ago. That was a long time, or 50 years ago. That was a long time ago. And I've been in civil rights ever since. It was so much fun to do that I never looked back. And then after that, I went to the Air Force, and I had lots and lots of experiences in the South. Too horrible to repeat here, but we had a lot of experiences. And so I was a confirmed civil rights advocate way back at the very beginning of my life. Now let's talk about the Nazis. The Aryan nations, what they like to call themselves, the Aryan nations / Church of Jesus Christ - Christian. And there was the political arm was the Aryan nations, and the religious arm was the Church of Jesus Christ - Christian. The antecedents of this religion went way back into the 1820s and 30s in England. England in the 1820s and 30s was at the peak of its power, and that old saying that the sun never sets on the English Empire was literally true. And so they needed an explanation. It was one thing to think in a secular way how wonderful the British were. which they were full of those types of sentiments back then. But they wanted a religious explanation for why they were so wonderful. And so they looked at the Bible, and where it said Israelites, they just kind of substituted the word English in there. And after you read it, after you read the Bible in a certain way, all of a sudden it became clear to the British that they were the chosen people of God. It wasn't the Israelites so much as it was the British. And why wouldn't you believe that? I mean, the British Empire, the sun never set on the British Empire. So it was an unqualified success. And when this book on British Israelism, what that book was, there was a book written, British Israelism, and it was published at about the same time as, within a few months of the Origin of Species was published in England. And that first year it outsold the Origin of Species. Self-flattery is a British occupation, and they're very good at it. And that idea got exported or imported in the United States. And it changed because there's lots of people in the United States that weren't British. It got changed to Christian identity movement. And for a long time, it was just subsects in the Baptist religion and all the different Protestant denominations. There was these little subgroups of Christian identity people who believed that they were the specific chosen people of God, and it wasn't Jews / Israelites, it was Americans. And then it had a further evolution where it became its own separate religion. So you could be a Christian and also be a Christian identity believer. And there was a large contingency of those people in Southern California. Well, there's a large contingency of just about everything in Southern California. But this was true, particularly of this Christian identity movement. And there was a fellow there that was very active in racist politics named Wesley Swift. And Butler, whose father, Richard Butler, one of the Aryan Nations, the leader of the Aryan Nations, Richard Butler, was a follower of Wesley Swift. And when Butler's father was a Klansman out of Colorado. And so Butler took to this religion quite aggressively. And Wesley Swift then passed away, and Butler became the leader of the California branch of the Church of Jesus Christ Christian. Then enters this idea of social Darwinism. And he believed that white people live together in large groups, like in the Northwest. It was largely a white enclave of people, let's face it. And that we self-selected ourselves away from African Americans, away from Hispanics, and away from people of color in general to live in the Northwest. So this was a movement without ideology. Butler believed that he could come to the inland Northwest and bring his ideology, and that as we had embraced white separatism de facto, that he would add the Christian identity movement to this de facto self-segregation that he believed we'd undergone, and that over time, over a brief period of time, then the entire inland Northwest, then Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, and Colorado, or not Colorado, but Utah would become, we have a geographer here, this group would then separate itself from the United States proper. And that was the genesis of all of this stuff that went on. And it was when they moved to Idaho, and when he moved from Southern California, he brought a large number of his parishioners with him. And they all settled very quietly for a period of years. And they joined the Posse Comitatus, and I won't go into that. If you know what that is, it's fine. It's another nut group. But they were the Posse Comitatus, but then he had done to the point where he felt that he could launch this Nazi movement, and he did so. And one of the first manifestations of that was that there was a Jewish restaurateur in Hayden Lake, Idaho, just a few miles from the compound. And they went down there one night. I don't know if Butler went, but some of the young members of his group went down there and covered the outside of this restaurant, and using the slurs and the German sayings that were anti-Semitic sayings, principally that were used during Glasnost, which is this famous or infamous night where so many Jewish shop owners in other cities suffered immensely at the hands of the Nazis. And so we knew that we had a problem, and we started organizing within days. I didn't start organizing, Tony started organizing within days following that. And the task force was formed shortly after that. And that struggle continued, us versus them, with the future of the inland Northwest actually at stake, and how are we going to be perceived, and how are we going to move forward socially, politically, and culturally. This was an extremely dangerous group of people. I stopped counting around 2001, and with it, they committed 100 felonies. They committed 9 murders, one of which was putting rocks in the pocket of a little girl, putting a bag in her over her head and throwing her in a pond. And it was one of the crimes that these Nazis committed. It was amazing, the bank robberies, the arsons, the kidnappings, the attempted kill Bill Wassmuth, who was the original first leader of the task force.
The second leader.
Yeah, the second leader. And then after that murder attempt, and for other reasons, he left and went to Seattle. And then I became the new. He handed me in the Norris is here to be the head of the task force. And so, and then we all were, and Tony was, and my wife was, and a whole bunch of other people were over time. But it was a very, very dangerous time for all of us. And they tried to kill Bill Wassmuth, I just mentioned that, and would call us up at night, and they threw rocks through our window, and they would call up and threaten Tony and says, we have a machine gun, we know where you live, coming to kill you. And we knew that they would. As a matter of fact, if the Nazis that we dealt with, if they were here tonight and thought they'd get away with it, they'd kill all of us. And they would delight in it because that was in service to God. They not only had the permission from God to kill Jews, they had an affirmative mandate somewhere in the Bible to kill people that were black, race traders like Tony and I, and most of you. And because the Jews were children of Satan, blacks were meant to be slaves, and anybody that was a civil rights activist was a race trader. And they would kill us first, then they would kill the Jews, and they killed the blacks. That was, I think, the order of priority. And they tried to do that. And so, but what we were doing all that time was gaining this expertise on how to shift culture and how to hold on to culture and how to marginalize this group of people that lived on a daily basis with these photographs as their diet. And it was extremely difficult, and it was extremely interesting. And what we learned as we got through this, and the dust kind of settles, and we had the trial, and we got this huge award, and then they filed bankruptcy, and we took over the compound, and that was in all the newspapers, and there was this huge movement towards civil rights, which is not abated, by the way, in the inland Northwest. And what we learned was that we were doing culture. We weren't fighting Nazis per se, that we were moving culture from point A to point B. And that was the most valuable lesson we learned, was that culture can be shifted. And it can be shifted either very swiftly, somebody asked us a bit about Grant County. So after this all over, say, well, what about Grant County? And we'll tell you all about Grant County. But it can be shifted very rapidly, it can be mobilized very rapidly, or in our case, it takes place over time. Culture, and we're doing another thing, we're doing it in education now, but it's not appropriate for this forum. But when you shift culture, you make sure you have a series of successes. So you do the easy success, you climb this mountain, and then you look from this mountain, you look around and there's another mountain that's a little higher, and it's a little steeper getting there. And the strength and the wisdom and the energy that was consumed to get to here enables you to plan to get to here. Then you get up on that second mountain, and then you can climb onto the third mountain. Almost sounds like a nursery rhyme or a primer in Sunday school or something, but that's exactly what happens. And so we learned that we weren't fighting Nazis in the regular way. We were fighting Nazis in a cultural war, which we were going to win, and in which we did win. But each of those little mountains that we climbed, and each of those little successes that we climbed, made us that much smarter and that much more agile and that much more willing to master the new height, which culminated and then in the trial and the bankruptcy, and they're actually physically leaving Cook County in the inland northwest and going back east. And then once we did that, then we're running out of Nazis, so we had other things to do, and Tony will talk about that. And there are other activities following the removal of the Nazis. But you can see through this room how fixated people can become. I mean, if we were in a McDonald's convention, you know, these would all be hamburgers, you know, around here. But they're not hamburgers, they're Nazis, and there is a Hitler. So they became fascinated and emboldened by Hitler and his image, and we conquered that, and with the goodwill, people with goodwill throughout the Inland Empire were able to do that. So and I'm going to be available for questions, and Tony will take us from this point and go forward as to the actual structure of how we did our success, and why we did it, how we were able to succeed. People have said that fighting the Nazis by the task force was a fight in a ditch with knives at midnight that lasted 32 years. And that's probably right.